welcome to Fast Politics, Angelo.
Thanks for having me.
It's just shocking how bad it's gotten, how fast, how bad. We were talking just for a second before this about topics, and one is more disheartening than the next. I don't even know where to start.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a fair thing. I mean, and part of the reason it feels so heavy in particular, especially a moment like, the last week or so, it's that the event itself is unpleasant, terrible, sad, right? Distressing. There's a whole bunch of emotions that come with the event in a vacuum.
Yeah.
But then if you take it one step removed, and this is where I think some of the heaviness that I feel comes in, and I know a lot of my team does, and you, is that you don't just see it as one event. Then you start to look at it. You don't look at it as a vacuum. You don't feel it in a vacuum. You feel it in part of a larger process of transition and change for our culture and for our society. And when you look at it like that, then the timeline becomes very collapsed. Say, okay, I see what's going on here. This is a catalyzing event that could very easily be used to exploit for the consolidation of more power, for more crackdowns. And so you see it through that lens because of the work you do in your sort of experience. And then on the other hand, you don't see any speed bumps. You don't see any friction slowing it down. And so it's hard to grab onto. So in a way, everything kind of just crashes emotionally and mentally into one quick moment where it's like whatever's about to happen in 6 months from now, you begin to feel and internalize that today. And that's certainly been my experience.
So you are the head of Media Matters. Media Matters is an organization that has experienced a lot of the kind of thing that this administration would like to do more broadly to outlets it considers to be disloyal to the cause. And so I would love you to talk about, we've talked about this before, you've been targeted by Elon Musk, you've been targeted by other groups, but talk to me about what that looks like real time.
I mean, in real time, what it basically is a series of calling them attacks. In this environment, it just feels very different. It's a series of very specific tactics that are designed to drain resources, financial and time, as well as emotional energy. And then as it's draining those things, it's injecting a specter of fear for additional escalation. And if you look at that framework, that's exactly what the conversation that's coming out of the administration the last few days has been like, right? Which is sort of this very nebulous, but yet seemingly credible threats of retaliation against this constellation of network that they won't name. And if you're a part of that day to day, independent of these threats, what it feels like is one, the natural response when you're under that kind of pressure is to go along, to get along, to bend, right? And
Which
we
is
saw
the
that
goal.
happening. That is the goal,
which we've
right?
seen largely has worked.
That is it. I mean, and most major national outlets, a lot, ABC and CBS, others, they bent. And even though they bent, Trump is still threatening them. He's continuing to threaten them. But they folded. They made a calculus that, well, we just won't continue to do certain things that's seemingly great and antagonize. We'll adjust our mission accordingly. We'll change the nature of our content. And that's the goal. It's to stifle dissent, which then makes it easier to consolidate power. And it becomes sort of this feedback loop that speeds up each cycle. So day to day, that's what it feels like. You feel sort of like, the best example I can say, on a practical sense, is that imagine your job is beyond just your job, right? It's already very difficult, but imagine you feel like you basically run a half marathon every day, and then you come home and you're supposed to live your life, except you're not, right? Everything is sore. You just feel a little sick, right? You don't get to compartmentalize that into the office. It's just, it spills over into everyday life. And that happens in these environments. And ultimately, what we're really talking about here isn't anything controversial. It's actually the most fundamental American thing, which is
speech. Again, I hate to be the cockeyed optimist here because there's no reason for optimism except one thing. And I bet you know what I'm gonna say, right? Pam Bondi's anti-free speech tirade of yesterday. Can you talk about it?
Yeah, I mean, she basically made it sound like they would punish and retaliate against anyone for saying anything they don't like, including, things that are beyond just, say, incitement to violence. But, she used a very broad definition of, and even just went so far, not just hate speech, just sort of anything they don't like. They basically define criticism as hate speech. And, she was pushed a little bit, not like in an aggressive way, but just sort of like expand on it and maybe help clarify. And she didn't even take the cue from the interviewer, which is a very friendly interview, with Stephen Miller's
Right. It's
wife.
his wife. Yeah.
Yeah, but she just dug in. I think she thought she was
Right.
doing great while the interview was happening. And at its core, though, when you take that away, you're kind of giving away the end result before it
Right.
happens. And when you say it out loud explicitly, that's part of the challenge in these moments too. And I think there's something significant about that interview. One of the challenges in these moments is that, as I certainly feel, I bet you do too, is like you're sort of warning about where it's going, right? The
Right.
current moment is unpleasant, but most people want things to feel normal and stable and say, well,
Right.
that's just rhetoric. Yeah, they're not going to do that thing. It can't possibly get that bad. It's
Right.
just this sort of slow boil. And so you have to try to piece it together. You sort of sound, you're theorizing, and it's an uphill climb to get people to really see that. And when they say it, when they explicitly say it, it changes the orientation around it and the way that it's reported on and the way that people think about it. And that is probably one piece of friction in the system, is that they themselves have communicated and articulated it. And that's part of, by the way, a broader pattern of overreach. I mean,
Right.
that has been unfolding in the last few days too. Like, they really tried to take this moment and turn it into something that I think most Americans, because they are paying attention, because it did strike them. The political violence is uneasy, and it's not, it really resonated. It seems obvious what they're doing in that way, and the overreach is always a risk, right? It will force them to
Right.
come back from the line, hopefully.
I think of J.D. Vance's speech in Europe, where he said, you guys don't. I mean, this speech, by the way, an incredible. You had Harris so worried about how she would do at the Munich Security Conference. Her aides telling me she killed it. They were the applause that. I'm thinking to myself, okay. Meanwhile, J.D. Vance goes and says, "You guys all are doing it all wrong," and walks out of there.
Yeah, and yeah, it's incredible. And look, that is the importance of all of this too, is that, you know, authoritarianism, especially during this stage of it, is theater. The performance does matter. If you think you killed it, people will kind of accept it. Or if you don't think it matters, which is the other part, if you don't make it seem as big of a thing, it's hard to then say, well, he blew it or it didn't go well. And look, he was also criticizing them for being anti-free speech, which is kind of amazing.
Well, that's
Yeah,
the point. I mean,
yeah.
wait, he was criticized as being anti-free speech, but he was lecturing them on free speech.
Well, that's right. Right. He was lecturing them on free speech. The point is, part of the right wing media. One of the stories in the right wing media that has been percolating for so long is that in Europe they've been cracking down on people's social media accounts, and they've
Right.
been essentially stifling. They've been using the government power to implement and drive a woke DEI agenda, and then retaliating against individuals. And that's he obviously gave a wink and a nod to that part of the larger right wing sort of narrative, and that has been a pretty big through line in the right wing media, is that the left has actually been vigorously anti-free speech. And
So
but
they're
he-
going to
and
get
yeah.
back at the left by being more anti-free speech.
Yeah, I mean, and they're justifying it too. They'll rationalize it. We are in this moment of the ends justify the means, like pointing out the
Right.
hypocrisy doesn't matter. They kind of embrace it. It
Yeah.
is sort of this, because it is about revenge. When Trump announced his
Right.
candidacy, his reelection, he did describe himself as an instrument of revenge. And the truth is, revenge is amazing. People love
Right.
it. You're not supposed to get revenge in balance. Like, it's a thing you're taught is not a good thing, because it is poisonous. It is poisonous to relationships. It's poisonous to yourself. It's poisonous to the people around you. There's so much collateral damage. Like, but it still feels amazing. And even if it doesn't
Right.
feel amazing, the thought of it feels amazing.
Right.
And it's a tempting thing to get out there and say, I'm going to get revenge against all the people that hurt you, or that made you feel like you were being judged for your ideas. And this is a part of that story.
And none of this, like, I don't necessarily believe that you can cause this, but they are responding to cancel culture, right? They're responding to the fury about the idea that a mob, a woke mob, I want you to, you and I both know this is not real, but we're going to just go along down this rabbit hole just to sort of talk through what the implications of it are. So, say you're a movie star, you say something that is cancelable, whatever it sounds
Yeah.
like, and you
Yep.
get canceled.
Yep.
Maybe it's sexism, maybe it's racism, maybe it's whatever. I'm talking 4 years ago when things still mattered. And then there's an outrage cycle, and then that person becomes a star on the right. And this is sort of the impetus, right? Is this the impetus they're using? I mean, obviously Trump has other stuff, but
Yeah, there's definitely a piece of, especially as it relates to getting all these individuals fired and terminated, that database that's being collected, of
yeah,
just like
say more
brand
about the
employees.
database,
There's
because
a
that
there's a
is
database that's percolating that claims to have tens of thousands of individuals on it. It originally started as anybody that was, that where they identify them and pull together their examples of them publicly celebrating or, or expressing support for Charlie Kirk's horrible murder. And
right.
that it's kind of expanded out now to sort of this broader thing of even including people that say, look, I didn't agree with Charlie Kirk. I thought that stuff he said was terrible, but I didn't think he should be killed. They're including those critiques now. So they've really
So
expanded out
does
because there's a
Spencer
frenzy.
Cox end up in that list? Because he did
Right.
say
A lot of people.
mildly, yeah,
Yeah. I mean, people acknowledging the provocateur nature. And what they've
Utah
been using this
governor,
database
by the
for is
way,
to get,
Utah
yeah,
governor Spencer Cox, who did say maybe not that the shooter was a leftist, which we don't totally know still, right? Because our FBI is very into Rayos. We don't totally know it may be more complicated than left versus right for the shooter.
right. I think that's
But
right. I think it probably is a
yeah,
lot more complicated than that. And but that ties into this, right? Because the part of it is this frenzy moment. You have this catalyzing event and you can use it for so many different things. One of the things that they've been doing is then going and getting people fired from their employers
right,
and holding that
right,
up as an example. And it has two effects. One is that it continues to reinforce the story that, hey, this is representative of liberals in America.
right,
They celebrate violence.
right,
They are violent to their core. Look at all these exemplars that we have been able to identify. And yeah, they're being fired, but like that is them. That's who they are. But the second thing ties into what you're getting to, which is that, and there've been right-wing media figures that have been talking about it, that this is giving liberals a taste of their own medicine.
right,
That this is it.
right,
And they see this as an example of them fighting back against cancel culture.
right,
Um, it's a very tit for tat approach, but that's where the tie-in is but
right,
it's organizing, because when you do these
right,
things, you're engaging people, you're asking them, and the vice president said this in his own, at the end of when he hosted the show, which is if you see somebody saying something like this, report them.
right,
I
right,
mean, he asked
right,
me, and that is, putting aside the substance of it, that is good old fashioned organizing. When you take
right,
people, give them a task or a charge, and then have them participate and engage, that's movement building. That's power building.
right, right,
And that's what it is. There's something, and when you participate in those things and you achieve some kind of externality, it's intoxicating
right,
because you're
right,
an
right.
individual who gets to feel something and feel like you're part of something. And that is what they're doing now. It's part sticking it to liberals and owning the libs, which has always been a core part of it. And part of it is them, what they see as embracing and refining the tactics of the left.
Yes, it does fit into that larger revenge narrative, right?
It does.
Backlash to backlash to backlash.
Yeah, because imagine you're sitting there and you see this trickle out a little bit with celebrities in Hollywood that sort of identify as conservative. Whenever they're doing their tours, they always talk about how they felt ostracized or that they couldn't
Right,
talk about their politics. That underneath the surface, as all of these social movements had been emerging over the past few years, these reactionary movements, some of which are very intense. If you feel like the mob is coming for your ideology or who you are, you could always be next, right? It creates this real fear. And it just sits below the surface, always sort of simmering. So in a way, it this is allowing them to channel all of those latent, intense emotions about the mob coming for them. And look, when there is these types of events, regardless of there's something very powerful. If you feel very powerless, right? And when there
yeah,
is, if somebody's being fired for saying they're a conservative, usually that's not what happens. It's that they said something
right,
truly terrible, and then it turns out that they have
right,
a larger pattern of saying even more terrible things.
right, right,
And
right,
this is ultimately about a business, and they just they don't want to invest. Like there are usually reasons for that. You're not
right,
usually going after somebody at like a local store like that. Usually
right.
doesn't create a national moment for the left, but putting aside the distinctions, as if you're watching that unfold, you do feel very powerless. Aside from being maybe a little scared, and that has there's kinetic energy when you're moving, and then there's potential energy when it's just sitting there, kind of brewing like a spring, ready to pounce. And that's kind of what they're tapping into. Is a lot of this wide scale feeling that anything they expressed will be penalized, and that they have to, whisper or do it in these private channels, and otherwise they'll get in trouble. And now they can just do it, and they can get revenge at the same time. And they're tapping into that too. And that's what reactionary movements are about.
One of the things that I wanted to bring up here, which I think is important, is that, and it devolves into some really, really fun inter-office fighting that has already emerged. So Candace Owens, I would love you to explain to our listeners what this story is between Candace Owens and, you know where I'm going with this, right? One of the two most main characters, Candace Owens and Bill Ackman. Please discuss, because I also think it's important in the larger scheme of how
Yeah.
these media figures are created.
Yeah, and I think that's important. I would start with a few things. One, you can do podcasts and shows, and that there's plenty of figures on the right, that have that. But, you know, not all of them are really talented, right? They may
Right.
have a show, but they may not be talented like broadcasters.
Right.
Candace Owens, regardless of her politics, ideology, the stuff she says, Candace Owens is actually a talented broadcaster. She's a
Yes.
talented storyteller. She
Right.
really has talent.
You don't
And
get to those numbers without
no,
having
she's
talent.
talented.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
yeah, look, I listen to and watch a lot of these people, and you know, she is a truly talented broadcaster. And
She's
here's
not,
the tie-in.
she's no
Yeah.
Katie Miller.
No, you're right, exactly. And and why that matters is that it's also worth knowing that Candace Owens' background, she is not always a right-wing figure.
Right.
Candace was not a right-wing figure. As she was she started out on the left, actually.
Right.
And
Yet another
yeah,
success for the party. Yes.
exactly. Like
Yeah.
there's nowhere for her to use that talent, right? There was not really a mechanism for harnessing talented people like Candace Owens. There just wasn't. The right has plenty of those institutions, one of which was Turning Point.
Right.
And
The
so you
left
have
does
this
not, and does
no,
not grow people, and does not. So there are no people like that on the left.
there just isn't really that. And so if you think about, if your Turning Point and your objective is to organize on campus and to build power amongst college students, and then you have this really talented person who's already demonstrated that they're disaffected. Remember, she did Blexit, which is the black exit from the Democratic Party. And so
Blexit.
she's sick. Yeah, she signaled that she was like in beginning the process of trying to find her own way. Her and Kirk became really close friends. They were friends. And
Right.
because there was that relation, she was affiliated with Turning Point, and they made investments in her, and that's the pipeline. That's how you transform. It's not as easy as, I'll give you $5,000 if you become a conservative. It's that I'm talented.
Right.
I have nowhere to go in this sector, but I want to use my talent, and this is offering it to me. And so it starts with rejection, and then it gets moved over. And here's how it all builds to what happened now. So that background is that she has that relationship, a really long history with Charlie Kirk and Turning Point. Obviously now she is out on her own, which there's a lot of stuff that happened in between, but she's still part of that ecosystem. And she's also been increasingly antagonistic toward, she's become a lot more conspiratorial, but she's been antagonistic toward Netanyahu, toward Israel,
Right.
toward sort of what she sees as, this sort of constellation of very prominent Jewish donors that are supporting Republican causes and trying to pressure them and force them to be more pro-Israel, and to slow down what she's seen as a transformation amongst her side, where they've been more willing to criticize Israeli politics.
Right.
And she sees that there's a bunch of us. And how that fast forwards is that, she claims that was this incident back in May
Right.
where Bill Ackman sort of like, got to Charlie Kirk and screamed at him and, chastised him, because the theory here is that Kirk was beginning to waffle on his
Right.
support for the current, the current stuff that Israel was doing, and that he was getting a lot of pressure from Turning Point donors and from prominent Republican donors, and that Bill Ackman was sort of the tip of the spear. That's what she claims.
Right.
And so she does this sort of like, and she, in the larger story,
Yeah.
she's upset. She feels like people are that they're not only whitewashing and pushing over history, claiming affiliation that they shouldn't have. What she's basically arguing is that people like Netanyahu and others are going to try to say that Kirk is pro-Israel no matter what, and to sort of claim that mantle, and associate hit Kirk's memory with that movement. And she's pushing back on that. And in particular, she's really trying to, I think, use this as a moment to say all of these people, Bill Ackman being the face of it, they really made Charlie Kirk's last few months a living hell, and we shouldn't forget them as part of the story. So
Right.
that's how we get here. And she obviously makes threats and innuendo. She promises she's going to release text messages. She doesn't get responses. Turning Point, for its part, has fully denied that and her accounting of the story entirely. But I don't think, based on her past, that means that she stops pushing that
Right.
narrative.
Right. I mean, that is the other free speech problem this crew is going to have, is that part of their way of succeeding is you have to get eyeballs. I mean, isn't Trump's whole theory of success about sort of getting eyeballs?
Yeah,
Just do
Trump's
one more.
theory of success. Yeah, I mean, Trump built an organized power on the fringes. I mean, that's sort of how he was able to just take over the Republican Party. Is that he used the fringes to build a lot of kinetic energy and attention and conversation, achieved narrative dominance, and then the rest kind of followed. The theory comes from actually New York City tabloids, and
Right.
it's this idea that they basically function as a herd, and that you actually only need a lead steer. Now, in the 80s, you get one or two tabloids to write a story, and everybody else kind of follows it.
Mm-hmm.
It's called the lead steer theory. Trump just took that lead steer theory and applied it to the modern information landscape by just getting the maximum amount of social attention and then having everybody else follow. And even today, when he was asked before he went on the helicopter, somebody asked him if social media was a cancer, and everybody is saying social media is a cancer. I mean, and that's
Right.
just like a thing. He said, no, no, some parts of it are very good, because to your question, he recognizes that so much of his power actually comes from being able to channel that for narrative dominance.
Narrative dominance. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.